All right.
Hello, everyone. Today we are meeting. With Maïna from Belgium. Maïna is an expert in purpose strategy for businesses around the world. He will be explaining us his new consulting firm that he just launched, and he will bring us to his background studying at the London Business School and also working into a multinational consulting firm. So with no further ado, we want to thank you, Maina, from Bruxelles, actually, bringing us some information about your expertise and taking the time to get the Conscious Strategists Group informed about your professional path. So with no further ado, you're welcome.
So thank you very much, Karine. Thank you for this invitation and for this great opportunity to exchange perspective and share my visions. To introduce myself, I would just say a few words, but I define myself as a global African business citizen. So really African at heart, but very, very much global and international minded in the business perspective. I also define myself as a strategic leader, thinker, and advisor. And by that, I mean that I aspire to provide perspective that challenge management thinking and also inspire business leaders to think, lead, and act strategically and distinctively. I'm a thinker and a leader who aspires to actually help shape the future of companies and transform industries and economies. And I'm an advisor who aspires to really help companies and advise them on the best strategies to follow in order to realize and harness the full power of their strategic purpose. And as you said, I will just launch my strategy consulting firm. And today I'm a very passionate, purpose-driven entrepreneur, and I very much feel on a mission to actually meaningfully impact the world through strategic consulting. On the academic side, as you mentioned, actually I have a dual degree. So I did start with a master degree in business engineering from the Sorbonne Brussels School here in Belgium.
I see.
And then later on, I've always been very passionate by what I was doing. I've been very passionate by my studies, and obviously I want to do more. And I seized the opportunity to do an executive MBA at the London Business School. And if I had to relate that to your underlying question about my background and my purpose, my journey around the purpose. This certainly has been a defining moment because one of the very class we had during the executive MBA program was actually a class around CSR.
Oh.
And these classes was a defining point in two ways. So first of all, it's really, I would say, it enhanced my awareness about all the questions related to corporate social responsibility or sustainability in general terms. But at the same time, it also crystallizes my ideas about importance and the need to move from strictly corporate social responsibility to corporate societal and strategic responsibilities. In the way that strategic aspiration and societal ambitions need to be actually intertwined to actually be able to give the opportunities to companies to really play to the full in their contributions to the greater good.
That's right. Yes, and that's a wonderful purpose for your own advisory firm, for yourself as an entrepreneur, as you said. So if we are talking about CSR and also integrating into the strategic aspect of a business, we often hear that it has to be through. And we know it's true that it has to be brought through the business strategy at the board level. So what would you see as a responsibility for the CEO and the board level to make sure that everyone around them and also sitting on the board that it can integrate those principles and those strategy throughout the company?
It's a great question because actually the whole era is fairly new for CEOs today. We've been brought in a journey, if you take the business community as a whole, from an area where we were very much focused on shareholder value exclusively, and step by step, little by little, we evolved towards what we now call stakeholder capitalism, where basically the idea of the value that the company has to create has to be much more holistic than just financially oriented. Now, talking about the CEO and the board, I really think that it really starts with the definition you have when you take about on the strategic purpose. And by strategic purpose, I would go further than what we hear, generally speaking, because very often we hear the notion of purpose as the notion of the purpose of the company as a corporate citizens. But I believe that the definition you might have and you might actually give to the strategy, what I call the strategic purpose, is much more holistic. It really starts with a holistic view on the purpose of the company, so its existential why, it's what it stands for, but not only as a corporate citizen, but as an industrial player, as an economic agent, and as a market-driven organization. So it's very important to really take all these dimensions of what the company is to have the biggest and the most global picture about what purpose can actually be put at the core of the strategic thinking of the firm, and how it can then be embedded in the strategic companies from strategic thinking up to strategic implementation. Now, if we really focus on the CEOs, there's no breaking news in the fact that their job is becoming more complex than ever. But there's one analogy I'd like to make about the role of the CEOs, or how I see it moving forward.
Yes.
I would actually make an analogy with accounting. It might sound counterintuitive, but bear with me, because I really think that it provides some clues about the new kind of leadership that is needed in order to help companies move forward in this new purpose-driven era. And I like to think of CEOs as having a leadership balance sheet with, on one hand, inspirational assets that they need to acquire or to develop, and on the other hand, I would say challenging liabilities that they need to manage in order to be effective in their role as a CEO. And if I take this one by one, on the inspirational asset side, I would say that first and foremost, moving now into a purpose-driven era, I think that CEOs are evolving from a strictly business-oriented CEO towards this purpose-driven CEO. And by purpose-driven CEO, if you take it a little bit further, you might think of the CEO as either a purpose-driven strategist or a societal corporate strategist. And by that I mean that there's a very strong requirement in the eyes of the CEO to actually take a dual lens and a dual perspective on how to drive strategy, on how to lead, how to craft, and then how to lead the organization. It's not more only about taking the strategic perspective of the company, but you really need to add the societal layer to really actually be able to articulate a purpose which is both a synthesis of, on one hand, the strategic ambition of the firm, and on the other hand, the societal aspiration of the firm as well. So that would be the second aspect, the first aspect of the CEO. There's a second aspect which is directly linked to his leadership capability. That purpose and certainly defining, articulating, and implementing a strategic purpose is very much an inner transformational growth process within the firm. And so the transformational leadership capability of the CEO is extremely important to be able to drive the process in the firm from defining to implementing, and then to really own the strategic purpose of the company. Because at the end of the day, you don't want strategic purpose to remain on the top as a thinking exercise, but at some point it needs to cascade down through all the level of the organization, and at the end of the day, the customer must also feel that the company he's interacting with is actually really delivering on purpose. And there are three ways in which the CEOs can really be mindful and very powerful vector of that strategic purpose. First, I would say is actually to nurture what I call the soul of the firm. Because today, we've very much heard about the heart and the mind of the firm. The heart being the thinking exercise, the strategic thinking, and all the conceptual, managerial concepts you might actually want to put into practice. The heart as being the workforce and the lifeblood of the company. But today, with the era of purpose, it's really about the soul level of the company that we are addressing. So being able to nurture that level is actually the very first point. There's a third point, and then I will come back to the link to the link between both. The third point is making sure that it actually is tangible for the company, it is tangible for the employees.
Yes.
And the ice on the cake, if I may express myself that way, would be actually to make sure to empower the employees to be actually the driving force of that purpose in their daily activities, between, among themselves as collaborators, as team players, but also externally vis-a-vis the client. And then the link between, the thinking about defining and articulating the purpose, and then making sure that employees feel empowered about it, is actually the leadership that it will embody. And then what I would say, not only leading by example, but living by example. And by leading by example, I really think and have in mind the idea of living the purpose you want to instill in the firm, and really embodying that in your decision, in your action, and in the way you lead others.
Exactly.
So that's what I call, the very inspirational aspect of the CEO world today and his responsibilities. But now, on the other side, as a matter of fact, you can't have the asset without liabilities. But the liabilities the CEOs has to manage today are actually very challenging. And by that I mean the very first one is really, to some extent, having the courage and the decisiveness sometimes to ask tough questions. And by that I mean that if you really want strategic purpose to be at the core of the strategy of the firm and at the core of its business operations, at some point you might need to make trade-off or to make very critical decisions about the business. It might be about the business portfolio of the firm. It might be about how you restructure firms. It might be about client segmentations, issues at the level of the business model.
It could be measuring it could be measuring and reporting also that could be added.
Exactly, and that's a fundamental point as well. If you want to make sure that you keep up the momentum, and as from the moment that you feel that the momentum is lost in a way or another, being able to identify the corrective course of actions you want to implement in order to make sure that both strategically and societally that the firm keeps stays on track. But now on the other side of the challenges, then there are some tensions, and I would say very purpose-specific tensions that the CEOs need to manage. The very first one I identify and I see is actually being able to manage the evolving scope of the firm as well as the evolving scope of the society.
Maïna, I want to develop that, the evolving scope of the company. That's interesting. I never really heard it, phrased that way. Could you develop your idea?
Yeah, sure. We're coming from a period, from an industrial organization era where the boundaries, beyond the firm, or the boundaries between industries were very much fixed. The environment was very clear. There was a certain predictability in the way, either the political or the geopolitical environment was evolving, as well as the economic environment. And if you go back at the micro level, I would say the competitive environment. So all these boundaries that were once fixed, very clear, are actually now disappearing. As well on the political side, with regions, treaties, bilateral treaties, multilateral treaties, sub-regions, sub-organizations, basically. So the whole geopolitical environment is actually a variable geometry environment today.
Mm-hmm.
And now if you look at the economic level, at both macro level and micro level, you see now the rise of ecosystems which actually blur even further the boundaries between the companies and even between industries. The rise of ecosystems actually makes some industries which were previously totally, totally they're separate. They make them converge, and all these blur of boundaries make actually the definition of the scope of the firm and even the scope of the industry very much more, very much complicated. And that's what I mean by evolving scope of the firm, evolving scope of the industry. And I would even put add an additional layer on this one, and certainly in the context of rising ecosystems, is that um, if we are talking about purpose, today the purpose of the company starts with the company, but is also the result of interaction with other partners, be it on the supply chain, be it as a complementer to be able to deliver services or product to clients, or even in some cases with the client themselves who are co-creators of the product and services that are being delivered. So all together makes makes the positioning of the boundaries of the firm very very complex for the CEOs. And as I said, for the geopolitical environment, it is also the case for the economic environment that it's a variable geometry environment, and so the scope evolves with the time, and with the evolution of the world as well. So that was the whole idea behind evolving scope of the firm. And then if you read the idea of purpose, how can you ensure that the purpose you actually define today will stay relevant and authentic to the firm moving forward, according to potential evolution of the industry, potential evolution of the geopolitical environment, taking into consideration the development and the development of customers or the consumer behaviors. So these moving factors, these moving variables, which were fixed before, makes the job even more complicated today. So that's the first, I would say, the first tension that the CEOs need to manage, in order to be able to actually define a relevant purpose for the firm.
A relevant one, and I think it's a necessary one. As you say, the tension, we hear that a lot also into, not a lot, but maybe because it's something that I'm interested in, that I come close to it and I read it. But it's also the fact that it will be relevant, but also it would be necessary to have a certain tension to create a reaction. So when we say attention, it's also it's a positive aspect, as I can, from what I can see, is something that it's a necessity to make the human react in a certain way to make sure that what is addressed is also relevant and relevant to the context of what's happening, and also as close as possible to the people, the community.
Sure.
And the customer, as you said, the customer behavior. But we know that people and citizens, I should say, have so much power. The power is really into their hand, and we hear so much about the pyramid, how you address the pyramid, and do you want to work with the pyramid concept, or do you want to have the voice from bottom down and bottom up? There's different concepts that we hear a lot. But we know that CEOs and board and the whole company needs to have ears and understand the power that that everyone holds into themselves. Yeah. So I believe the tension is something necessary, and every parties, every, as we say, stakeholder, les parties prenantes, as we say in French, needs to realize how much power they do have, and that not only that, but they need to listen to each other. And I think if they listen instead of doing meetings and meetings and meetings, as you said, thinking that can be translated into actions.
Yes,
And we
you're
saw a lot of
absolutely right.
movement the
Yeah,
past
you're
year,
absolutely
just as you said, the society and economically, we saw so many changes, and we saw magnificent reaction that will help for the future. So there's so many nice movement, nice and necessary movement that came along the past year.
yeah,
So as you say, CEO, they do have a role of leadership, and a good leader listen a lot. So
sure.
yeah, so I think the stakeholder, they do have those role to play, as you said.
And
Yeah.
actually, I think it's a good transition to the other tensions that I had identified. So the other three other tensions that I had identified at CEO and board level, which actually somehow complete what you said. So the second tension was actually directly related to how CEOs and board can react to the evolution of the world. There's a tension between the time of realization of the business result and the time horizon of society contribution. If you really balance, strategic ambition and societal aspiration, there's a times where CEOs might be, confronted with the trade-off to make between, the advancement of a sustainable development goal, for example, and the growth objective, of a transformation program. And which one takes the priority or which one prevails over the other ones is a very, very critical trade-off to make. And that's the kind of very difficult CEOs and very, very difficult decisions that the CEOs might actually be confronted with. A third tension, and directly related then to the notion you highlight of leadership, is actually the tension you might have due to the fact that the strategic purpose is not only in the hand of the company, not only in the hand of the CEOs, but also in the hand of powerful external stakeholders. If you take the supply chain partners, will they, align themselves with the purpose of your company? It's a critical question, but the underlying question is actually you know, the difference you have in the way CEOs will lead the advancement of the purpose-driven agenda. Internally, they do have all the levels of powers and influence to do it. Obviously, as a matter of fact, they are the lead of the companies, providing that in the best case, they're really inspired and instill a great spirit in the company, people will follow them. So there's a natural flow, there's a natural followership that you will find internally within the company.
Yes.
But externally, they do not have necessarily the same level of powers with companies which are not under their control, which are external partners. And so there might be a tension between, or what I call external followership, so in the ability of the external stakeholders to actually align themselves with the purpose of the company, as defined by the CEO and the board, and the internal leadership. So that's a tension. And then the last tension, which has been highlighted by some recent event as well, is actually the need for alignment between the executive team and the board. To be honest, when I first started publishing about strategic purpose last year, I would say that I had taken that for granted. But the reality is that you really need a very strong alignment between the executive team and the board. Why? Not only on the destination, because I think that in a way or another, putting the board together with the executive team around the table, facilitating the discussion, allowing them to come up with a common sense of purpose for the company, regardless of the challenge of the very strong engagement in the discussions, you might assume that at some point they will be agreed on a destination. But along the way, on the journey, there might come times where trade-offs have to be made, and it's very important at those moments of critical trade-off that the board has been involved in the first place, to ensure that they do understand actually the challenge of the decision, and that you don't have this disconnect between the priority the executive teams might be willing to put on one point versus what the board might have thought as the ideal solution, because you would have had that discussion in the first place. So those are the tensions that I identify as the challenging liabilities the CEOs need to manage. But then, as you would have in a balance sheet, the assets and the liabilities match each other, they balance each other, and so it will be part of the CEO as well to be able to manage. I like to think of the CEO as as complex equilibrium officer.
Ah, I like that.
Because at the end of the day, when we think about uh, inspiring your people, but at the same time managing those tensions in a way that allows the firm to evolve, to grow, but at the same time to stay in dynamic equilibrium and dynamic and evolutive equilibrium, that is actually really what is at the core of the CEO today.
It's true. Yeah, totally understand what you mean by that, how important it is, and the information that you clarify with us with the way you see the CEO role, and also bringing the equilibrium en français, or equilibrium. Our teacher at Harvard in business strategy into sustainability, Rebecca Henderson, she speaks about that the terminology also in her new book. It's a goal, right? It's goal to be able to reach that. And this week, I was watching a webinar from CERES. It's CERES. It's an organization from California, and they've been providing investor information, business information to leadership to integrate sustainability strategy. And they had an interview. Mendy, the president, had an interview with the one of the executive. I believe he was the CEO or responsible for the sustainability. I believe he's the CEO of Coca-Cola. And the interview is so interesting. I'll send it to you, Maïna, and also to the link when we will post the video. Quite an interesting interview, and a lot of concept and idea that you brought up was discussed into this webinar. So we'll share the link.
It will be my pleasure to listen to it.
Yes, they do have a lot of, the board of director and the executive, they do have a tribune, and they have a role also in society to be the first, to be the pioneer, and to influence their peers, that sit into positions that are similar. So we need those kind of a big, huge company. Sure. And as you said, he was actually saying that Coca-Cola is working right now with Unilever and also with Walmart, like all these big ones. When you study sustainable business strategy, you know that these guys, this multinational global company, are doing a lot of effort, a lot of concrete action, and they're doing a lot of good things. So it's an interesting point to bring. So to conclude the idea of a new era that we are starting after this pandemic that we've been through the past year and a half, what would you see into the coming year? Like, what would you, as an advisor, what would you advise the business for the 2021 year?
It's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. I think that today, and certainly after such a crisis, strategy is more needed than ever. And by strategy, I mean strategic clarity is more needed than ever. And I would really get back to the idea of strategic purpose at the heart of the strategy, because I think that the crisis has given opportunities to many of us to actually design or coming up with a new or fresh perspective about how things were done in the past, and also about how we project ourselves in the future. So moving forward, I would really advise CEOs, in companies in general, to really clearly think about how they articulate their strategic purpose moving forward, because it's about articulating and redefining the DNA for the coming 20, 50, 100 years. And it's a highly structuring perspective to do, but it can be very beneficial as well, because actually the end of the name of the game, if you think about strategic purpose, is really arriving at the point where profit and purpose actually serve each other and mutually reinforce each other. And that's basically I was mentioning the complex equilibrium officer. I think that it's really very symptomatic to actually view. It comes down to that equation between mutually reinforcing profit and purpose. And now if we think about the different layers of strategy when the most critical questions are asked, if you think about corporate strategy in the perspective of the strategic purpose, it really think about what will be the best portfolio of businesses, value chains, market segment that actually fit the purpose they aspire to fulfill in the society, and how this portfolio of business must evolve. And then as corporate strategy rests on two pillars. The first one is the portfolio, but the other one is what I call the corporate center strategy. So basically the strategy of the head office or the headquarters in supporting the portfolio strategy is what will be the role of the corporate center in diffusing the strategic purpose moving forward. So basically, it's about rethinking the processes, the mechanism from the corporate level and top down to all the level of the organization, in order to make sure that the strategic purpose is actually really embedded in the company, not only strategically but also operationally, and then individually in a way that empowers employees. In terms of business model, I would really go back to the idea, and the critical question I was referring to is really making sure that the business model aligns strategically with the purpose of the company, and that may require to have a clear look and a deep look, if we need to say deep dive, in all the dimensions of the business model, starting with the value proposition. And I'm not talking only about the product and service you want to put forward, but also the type of value you want to create. Talking about the functional value, how does my product or service get the job done? The emotional value, what is the value, the emotional value that people or that consumers do attach to the brand, but increasingly at a higher level, what is the societal value I do create?
How useful? How useful?
And if we move to the client dimension, it might need to require, it might need to redefine market segmentation, client segmentation, client definition, but also the way you do engage effectively with clients, and the way you organize your distribution channel. On the other side, if you look at the infrastructure dimension of the business model, what is the best value chain that will serve the purpose in the most effective and then the most efficient way? What are the assets on which those value chains need to be resting in order to make sure that the whole infrastructure, the whole business architecture of the company is actually supporting effectively the purpose of the company? What are the partners you might want to bring around the table to actually help you moving this purpose-driven agenda? And at the end of the day, as a matter of fact, the resulting and positive consequence of that should be on higher revenue side than the cost side, but once again with the idea of having profit and purpose nurturing each other. Exactly. So those would be my advice. And maybe one advice I would add, which I do believe comes very much under the radar when it comes to purpose, is trying as much as possible to link your purpose to the core capabilities of the firm. And the reason why I say that is because at the micro level, it's about maximizing your impact in the society, but also in the industry, in your business as an economic agent and as a market-driven organization. But it's also about optimizing the resource you actually mobilize in order to do it. And when you look at the picture at the macro level, it's actually about aggregating all the different positive contribution made by companies, so that there's no contradiction in advising companies to really focus on the purpose that is strategically fit to their core capabilities, because globally speaking, the other areas of positive contribution might be filled by other companies which will rely on other and complementary core capabilities. And I believe it also has major implication internally in terms of investment, because when we think about purpose, and certainly as from the moment that you really put purpose at the core of your strategy, purpose decisions become investment decisions.
Of course.
And as from the moment that they become investment decisions, I mean, there are a whole set of criteria you want to use in order to make trade-offs between potentially conflicting decisions. And the way I see to really help optimize resources, resource allocation, and actually maximizing the impact within the company without seeing purpose initiative as something which comes in conflict with the conduct of the business, is actually to really link your purpose to the core capabilities of the firm.
It makes sense. That's a good way to see how everything is connected, and
exactly.
It is holistic, as you said, and we need to remember that word. And as we often hear, also it's an ecosystem, but the way that it's working out to all together, and it's there's always dependable. A step always depend from the other one before. Yeah. So collaboration is something that is crucial. And also, as you said, I think clarity is something that needs to be addressed seriously, and that needs time. And the purpose needs time to be absorbed, to be assimilated by the whole workforce of the company, from every department, every level. And that's what Coca-Cola actually was saying in the webinars, that they took months to make sure that the actual, we say purpose, mission, was something that was really used very often, not a long time ago. And they really developed a mission, a purpose, a slogan, if you want, in a way that the sentence was ringing, resonating with them. But really every word, and there's not many words, and that's great. Being into communication, that's how you can be efficient. So, and they want to refresh the world, and they want to globally have an impact, but they really took months before everybody assimilated the actual meaning of their new purpose, that they did realign. And also, as you said, to make sure that we have an impact, that it needs to be clear for everybody. Sure. So it's much more easier to work as a team towards the alignment that they have decided. This is wonderful information.
Yeah, but I think the notion of time you mentioned is a very good one, because according to me, it highlights 2 points. The first one is that we must not forget that for some of the areas around purpose, some of the areas are addressing or aimed at addressing some externalities. Externalities that that have been there for some of them for decades. So the notion of time also highlight the notion of patience. Even us as citizens and customers, there is a certain level of patience and indulgence we need to have with regard to companies, because those are beyond the size of investment. Those are really huge commitment that needs to be made. And the second point that, according to me, it does highlight is the times you need to actually think about what your DNA and what your forthcoming identity is. And I tend to think, and I consider the strategic purpose the overarching core values of the company, and also its most engaging form of identity. And this is not something you can just redefine overnight. It starts with self-awareness at the corporate level, about what the firm is, what it has stood for many years, and moving forward, how you want to redefine it, and how you aspire to redeploy your capabilities, your skills, and your people around that new ideas. So these certainly takes time to actually to figure out and then to translate in some of the ways that I have highlighted in our conversation.
And you did it perfect, Maïna. I totally agree and understand where you're coming from economically, and also going through an engineer professional path, as I can see. It's very systematic and it's systemic thinking. We really try into the scholar sector. I read a lot more about this systemic thinking concept that is something that we should look for into the way we bring solution into corporations. And as you said, I think the key word is identity, and corporation needs to be taking this aspect, this dimension of their role and their responsibility, that they have an identity, and it's important to see how they can be serving the community. So it's going to be a circular exchange, like in circular.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
It's to be agile, I believe, to make sure that they are clear with their identity, and to be agile, to also understand that, there's generations and there's so many aspects that we need to take into account, and to be flexible to rethink what should be addressed in the future. So that takes time. It's R&D, and it's working with like Ellen MacArthur Foundations, where they do a lot of research into bringing the sustainability aspect. Let's say for the packaging, let's say I'm back to Coca-Cola, that this is a big aspect for them, and also the water. So a lot of corporations are affiliating with partners from cross-sectorial businesses. So that's a big strength that we should put forward. Thank you so much, Maïna. It was really powerful to hear all those sectors that you brought together into a clear strategy for businesses that they should be taking care of for the future, and they should nurture, as you say, to make sure that their soul as a business that is also well taken care of, so they can be more useful to citizens. We will go.
Thank you very much for the privilege of being here, and for the opportunity to share ideas as well, and share my vision. So I greatly appreciate our conversation, and hope that it will be the first one of a longer series.
It will, as we said, there's so many topics from what the first discussion that we have, that we want to develop, as we talked about. And also, I know you wrote few academic articles and business articles that you wrote. Sure. So we will soon share them, and can explain a few of the topic that you have been developing, and that will be wonderful to be able to share those knowledge with the Conscious Strategists Hub.
It will be my pleasure.
Thank you, Maïna. Looking forward to talk to you really soon, and thank you for joining us from Bruxelles this morning.
Thank you.